Never keep open cans in the fridge because that "I'll deal with it later" habit can quietly mess with your blood sugar over time, and you won't connect it to the can until your body gets less forgiving after 50. It feels harmless. You open beans, tomato paste, tuna, pineapple, use a little, then slide the can into the fridge to avoid extra dishes. But once that seal is broken, the food starts changing. Oxygen gets in, the metal and lining are suddenly in play, especially with salty or acidic foods, and the taste can shift in a way that makes you reach for more sugar, more salt, and bigger, just a little more portions without noticing. And that matters, because those tiny add-ons are exactly what show up later as stubborn cravings, bloating, higher morning blood sugar, and that frustrating feeling like your body is suddenly keeping score. In this video, you'll learn what actually happens inside an open can, which canned foods are the biggest troublemakers, and the simple storage switch that protects your food and your future self. The open can illusion. It's sealed enough. The first trap is psychological. A can feels sturdy, it feels sealed. Even when it's opened, it still feels like a protected container. The metal is rigid, the label looks official, and you can sort of bend the lid back down and pretend it's closed. But from a storage perspective, an opened can is basically a bowl with sharp edges. Air moves in and out, fridge odors move in, moisture condenses, and the food sits in direct contact with the can's interior lining and metal seams. That contact matters more once oxygen is introduced because oxidation changes the chemistry of the food itself, and acidic foods can speed up reactions at the surface. So even if the food doesn't go bad overnight, it can start changing in subtle ways, taste, smell, and composition long before it looks suspicious. The real concern: what can migrate into your food? Modern cans usually have an internal lining designed to prevent the food from touching bare metal. That lining is important because many foods, especially acidic ones, would otherwise corrode the can and pick up metallic flavors. But linings aren't magic force fields. Over time, and especially once the can is opened and stored, small amounts of chemicals from the lining can migrate into the food. You've probably heard of BPA or bisphenol A, a chemical historically used in some epoxy can linings. Many brands have moved to BPA-free linings, but BPA-free doesn't automatically mean chemistry-free. It can mean the lining uses different bisphenols or alternative materials with less long-term research. Why does this matter for blood sugar and diabetes control? Because BPA and related endocrine-disrupting chemicals have been studied for associations with insulin resistance, obesity, and type 2 diabetes risk. The science is still evolving, and not every study agrees on the size of the effect, but the pattern is consistent enough that many public health voices recommend reducing unnecessary exposure, especially from food contact materials, when the fix is easy. And an open can in the fridge is, unfortunately, the perfect setup for unnecessary exposure. Not because it's instantly toxic, but because it's avoidable, repeated, and often involves the exact foods people eat frequently: beans, tomatoes, soups, coconut milk, fruit, fish. There's also the simpler, older school issue: metal. When food sits in an opened can, it can pick up traces of metals like tin or iron depending on the can and the food. Again, you're not drinking liquid metal, but even small taste shifts can change behavior. Metallic or flat flavor is one of the biggest reasons people add more sugar or salt without thinking. The blood sugar link nobody talks about: the rescue habit. Here's where things get sneaky and incredibly real. When canned food tastes slightly off, more metallic, more dull, more fridgy, people rescue it. They sweeten tomatoes with sugar. They oversalt beans to bring them back. They drown tuna in mayo. They turn canned fruit into syrupy desserts because the fruit tastes flat. Those aren't moral failures. They're normal human responses to food that lost its best flavor. But if you're over 50 or you're heading there, those rescue moves are exactly what makes blood sugar harder to control. Extra sugar, extra refined carbs, bigger portions, and more sodium that can worsen blood pressure and water retention. You end up with a meal that hits your system harder than the original plan. So the open can isn't only about what leaches in, it's about what you add on top. And that's why people feel like they're doing fine. But their numbers keep drifting. The daily little extras become the true story. The worst offenders: which canned foods react the most? Not all canned foods behave the same in an opened can. The biggest problems happen with foods that are acidic, salty, or strongly flavored because those conditions can accelerate taste changes and interactions at the surface. Tomatoes and tomato paste are the classic example. Highly acidic, and the flavor is delicate enough that metallic notes show up fast. Pineapple and other sharp fruits can lose that bright, sweet acid balance, and people compensate with extra sugar, syrup, or just a little sweetener in the bowl. Pickled foods like sauerkraut are acidic and salty, and they can perfume your entire fridge while their own taste shifts. Soups and broths, especially salty ones, can go flat, which is why people keep adding seasoning. Coconut milk is rich in fat, so it absorbs fridge odors easily, then tastes off, and the fix becomes sweeteners or extra starch. Beans aren't very acidic, but their flavor changes quickly with oxygen exposure, so people resalt heavily. And fish like tuna or sardines can oxidize and smell stronger, which is how just make a quick lunch turns into a mayo-heavy salad without anyone noticing the calories climb. If you notice you only get weird taste from certain cans, you're not imagining it. Those foods are simply more reactive. Why this gets worse after 50? There's a reason this topic hits harder later in life. First, taste and smell often change with age. Many people need stronger flavors to feel satisfied, which makes them more likely to add extra sugar, salt, and sauces when something tastes dull. Second, digestion becomes more sensitive. Oxidized fats and strong metallic notes can feel harsher, and people experience more reflux, bloating, or that unsettled stomach feeling from meals that used to be fine. Third, metabolic flexibility declines. In plain English, your body isn't as quick to handle spikes. That means the same little extra sugar in your tomato sauce can push your post-meal glucose higher than it would have years ago. The same salty soup can leave you more swollen and thirstier, which affects sleep, stress hormones, and appetite the next day. An underrated blood sugar domino effect. So when people say, after 50, everything I eat affects me more, this is the kind of boring daily detail that makes that statement true. The simple fix that solves almost everything. Here's the good news. This is one of the easiest kitchen fixes on the planet. The moment you open a can and don't use all of it, transfer the rest to a non-reactive container glass or ceramic is ideal. If you only have plastic, use it for cold storage, but plan to serve from it, not heat from it. Cover it tightly, store it on a shelf where the temperature stays steadier, and label it. If you're the I'll remember type cause spoiler, you won't. One small transfer cuts down the time food sits against the can lining, keeps flavors cleaner, and helps you stop rescuing dull leftovers with extra sugar and salt. And yes, it creates one extra dish, but if you've ever paid for test strips, medications, doctor visits, or the emotional stress of a rising A1C1 extra, dish is the cheapest trade you'll ever make. The "but my grandma did this" argument. You might be thinking, but my grandma did this? True. Many people grew up with parents who stored open cans in the fridge and lived long lives. Two things can be true at once. A lot of people get away with a lot, and you don't have to keep avoidable exposures and avoidable blood sugar swings just because it's traditional. Also, today's world is different. We have more packaged foods, more daily exposures from multiple sources, and more people dealing with insulin resistance earlier. The goal isn't fear. The goal is stacking small advantages, because small advantages add up. Quick reality check. If you have any of these, this matters more. If you're already managing diabetes or prediabetes, if your blood pressure is creeping up, if you notice strong cravings after salty meals, or if your fasting glucose is unpredictable, this is a simple lever you can pull. It won't replace medical care, but it can reduce one quiet variable that makes everything harder. And if you're younger, this is even better news. You get to build the habit now, so you don't spend your 50s trying to unwind decades of tiny mistakes that felt harmless at the time. Because the open can habit is rarely alone. It usually sits next to other small shortcuts that stack like reheating in the same container, eating straight from the package, and letting leftovers linger until they're questionable. And one of those shortcuts is the real blood sugar wrecking ball, because it turns healthy canned foods into a completely different kind of meal. That shortcut is eating straight from the can and calling it portion control. It sounds funny, but watch what happens with canned fruit, sweet corn, baked beans, evaporated milk, or even healthy soups. When the can becomes the bowl, your brain loses the serving size signal. You take a few bites, then a few more, and suddenly you've eaten 2 or 3 servings. Without ever sitting down for a real meal, that's a blood sugar spike disguised as a snack. And after 50, those spikes don't just disappear, they echo into cravings later. Worse, every spoon back into the can brings saliva and food particles with it, which accelerates weird flavors and spoilage. The next time you open the fridge, you're eating a more reactive, less predictable version of the same food, Exactly what stable glucose control hates, overtime. And over time, that's how a simple no extra dishes habit stops being about storage and starts becoming a quiet pattern one that can make blood sugar control harder later in life, even if you don't notice it right now. The fridge grazing trap. Nobody connects to blood sugar. Here's the real danger of an open can in the fridge. It turns food into a constant, low-effort temptation. A sealed jar or a proper container feels like a leftover. It has a beginning and an end. You have to open it, scoop it, close it. There's a tiny moment where your brain registers, I'm about to eat something. An open can doesn't have that moment. It's already open. It's already available. It sits there like a half-finished thought. So what happens? You don't necessarily sit down and eat a meal. You do the modern version of survival. You walk past the fridge, spot the open can, and decide to use a little coconut milk in coffee, a little tomato paste in a sauce, a little corn tossed into a salad, a little fruit stirred into yogurt, a little soup heated up because you don't want to cook. Individually, those are normal choices. The problem is the rhythm. Open cans invite repeat hits, tiny add-ons across the day that feel too small to count. And that's exactly how blood sugar gets messy over time. Not always from one huge dessert, but from constant small extras that stack into a bigger glycemic load than you intended. Then you turn 50, and suddenly your body starts acting like it's keeping score. You don't recover from spikes as quickly. You're more sensitive to stress hormones. Sleep disruption affects appetite more, so the casual little bit pattern becomes a bigger deal. And you'll swear nothing changed because you're still eating the same foods, but you're not eating them the same way. The rim zone, where cold storage turns into a mini biology experiment. Now let's zoom in on something most people never consider: the rim and the lid area. When you put an open can in the fridge, the cold air and moisture can create condensation around the opening. That rim is exposed, it's sharp, and it's hard to clean. If you pour from the can, the liquid runs down the edge and dries there. If you spoon from it, tiny streaks get left behind. If you loosely cover it, the cover shifts. The rim stays damp and fridge air keeps circulating. That damp ring around the opening becomes the perfect place for invisible mess, not always enough to make you sick in an obvious way, but enough to change the food quality faster and raise the chances of mild digestive irritation. And here's where this connects to diabetes control after 50. Digestion and blood sugar are not separate systems. If your gut gets irritated, if you get that subtle, crampy, unsettled, slightly inflamed feeling, your body doesn't just shrug. It can respond with stress hormones, and stress hormones can push glucose higher and cravings louder. It's one of the most underappreciated reasons people wake up with higher fasting numbers and think, what did I even do? Sometimes the answer is boring. Your body didn't love what you fed it the night before, and your metabolism had to clean up the situation while you slept. So again, it's not that an open can is guaranteed to make you sick. It's that it increases the odds of little irritations and little inconsistencies, exactly the stuff that becomes louder after 50. The I don't want to waste it reflex that backfires later. There's also a sneaky emotional lever open cans pull. Guilt. A can feels like a project you started, and an open can feels like a project you're failing to finish. So when you see it days later, you don't think, do I want this right now? You think, I should use this before it's wasted. That should changes how you eat. It makes you build meals around leftovers that weren't part of your plan. It makes you eat when you weren't really hungry. It makes you stretch portions. It makes you toss food into meals it doesn't actually belong in just to get rid of it. That matters for blood sugar because the most stable glucose patterns come from meals you choose intentionally, meals with predictable portions, predictable carbs, and a predictable rhythm. The use it up reflex turns eating into cleanup. Cleanup eating tends to be chaotic, more snacking, more random carbs, more late-night bites, less structure. And after 50, structure matters more than willpower. It's not about discipline, it's about your biology being less forgiving of random spikes and random timing. The nighttime problem: open cans become late snacks. This is where it gets painfully real. Most open cans in the fridge aren't sitting there because you have a beautiful meal plan. They're sitting there because you were busy. And when people are busy, the time they deal with the can is usually at night when they're tired, hungry, and looking for something fast. Night eating hits differently for a lot of people, especially as they age. Late snacks are more likely to raise next morning glucose. Late sodium makes sleep worse and increases thirst. Late carb-heavy meals can trigger that wired but tired feeling, then cravings the next day. And open cans quietly feed this cycle because they feel like not real food. It's just a little something. It's not like you cooked a meal. But your body doesn't care whether it came from a can or a cutting board. Your body cares that you ate especially late, especially if it's something that digests fast or sits heavy. So the open can becomes a convenience portal. It turns "I'll have nothing" into "I'll have a little," and a little becomes the consistent habit that shows up later as, why is my fasting glucose higher now? Why are my cravings stronger? Why do I feel like I'm always fighting my appetite? The packaging trap. Why cans make portions feel smaller than they are. Here's another psychological trick packaging plays. Cans make servings feel smaller. A bowl looks like a serving. A plate looks like a meal. A can looks like an ingredient. Even if you're eating the same amount, the can makes it feel like you're just using a little. That's part of why open cans quietly disrupt diabetes control. They blur the boundary between ingredient and food. When those boundaries blur, portions drift upward without you noticing. The difference between stable blood sugar and messy blood sugar is often not a massive lifestyle change. It's a few invisible portions that grew over time. You can eat the same exact food and get different results simply because your portions became less consistent. And after 50, consistency is everything. The canned food that acts like a sneaky blood sugar accelerator. Now, here's the detail that stings. The cans people leave open are usually the ones that are easiest to overuse, not the boring ones you measure carefully, the handy ones, the ones you pour, the ones you stir in, the ones you add just a bit more of because they make food taste better quickly. That's why this habit has such a strong diabetes control connection. It's not that the can itself is a sugar machine, it's that open cans tend to create a lifestyle pattern. Quick fixes, quick add-ons, quick meals, quick snacks. Quick is the enemy of stable blood sugar because quick meals are often missing balance. They're missing fiber, they're missing protein, they're missing the sit down and eat moment that slows you down. Instead, they're built out of convenience pieces assembled while you're distracted, then eaten fast. Your body after 50 doesn't love fast, the habit that protects your future self without turning you into a food prep monk. So, what do you do with this? Without turning your kitchen into a laboratory and your life into an episode of extreme meal prep, you change the system, not your personality. You stop buying can sizes that leave you with leftovers you'll forget. That alone solves half the issue. If you consistently use half a can of something, you don't have a storage problem, you have a sizing problem. Smaller cans, single-serve cans, or products in resealable cartons are boring solutions that work ridiculously well. You also stop thinking of leftover canned food as something to deal with later and start treating it like something with a plan. If you open a can of tomato paste, you already know where the rest is going. Maybe into a second recipe the next day, maybe portioned and frozen so it becomes future cooking shortcuts instead of fridge clutter. Same with coconut milk, sauces, and broths. When you freeze small portions, you're not wasting. You're building a toolkit, and the biggest shift of all is timing. If you're going to keep leftover canned food, you don't let it linger until it becomes a guilt object. You use it quickly while it still tastes clean and behaves predictably. The longer it hangs around, the more likely it becomes a late night, I'll just eat something moment. That one shift shorter timelines does something powerful for blood sugar. It removes randomness. It keeps you from building meals around old leftovers out of obligation. It keeps your portions more consistent. It keeps you from stacking extra snacks you didn't intend. And for anyone already managing diabetes or prediabetes, removing randomness is one of the fastest ways to reduce frustration. Not perfection, just fewer surprises. The big takeaway, this isn't about fear, it's about control. To be clear, this isn't a horror story about cans. It's a story about habits. Open cans in the fridge create the perfect storm for blood sugar problems later because they encourage grazing, blur portions, increase use it up eating, and turn convenience into a daily pattern. Those patterns don't always show up immediately. They show up after 50, when your body stops brushing off the small stuff and starts responding to it. So if you're younger, this is your warning. The future version of you will either thank you for building smarter storage habits now, or spend years trying to undo the convenience patterns that felt harmless. And if you're already over 50, this is good news. This is a tiny lever you can pull today that can make your eating more predictable fast without changing your entire life. Because the goal isn't to be perfect. The goal is to stop letting tiny habits quietly run your metabolism in the background. If this video made you look at your fridge differently, hit like and subscribe and tell me in the comments. What's the #1 canned food you always end up storing after opening beans, tomatoes, coconut milk, soup, fruit, tuna? The more specific you are, the easier it is to expose the exact hidden habit that's messing with your blood sugar without you noticing.